welcome to the January 14th, 2019 council meeting. This is my first meeting, so when I make a misstep and forget my rules of Robert's Rules of Order, forgive me. There's a couple of good Robert's Rules people in the audience, so I'm sure that I'll get some attention and help when I need it. We have our media here. Marshall, welcome. Tony, welcome. Tony represents Tower News, and Marshall represents the Timber Jay. Glad to have you here. If anyone's recording the meeting, there was a recorder up behind the bookshelf there the last few meetings. I don't see it, but it's fine if you do. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we're being recorded. Is that okay? Okay, Linda, let's start with call to order and roll call.
Abrahamson.
Here.
Anderson.
Here.
Deldo.
Here.
Fitton.
Here.
Pringston.
Here. Everyone has an agenda, and does everyone have a packet? And Linda, is there an extra packet that's available for the public?
Yes.
Okay, and where's that? Is that out on the table up there?
It's on the table.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
There's a packet on the table.
So are there any changes to the agenda? I have two that I want to line out. One is I want to wait until the next meeting. And by the way, I was going to say this from the outset. If any of you have any trouble hearing us up here, please raise your hand, let us know. We'll speak up. And if there are any resolutions, motions that are made, and so with support, and we have a vote, I will ask our Secretary Treasurer to read the motion so that everyone has a full understanding of what the motion is that's been either approved or not approved. The next item, number 3 on the agenda, is a closed council meeting, and I just have two questions. I was unaware of this before.
Whoa. You gotta finish number 2 first.
Oh, thank you. See, I knew someone would help me out. So are there any other changes to the agenda?
You were gonna strike something?
Yeah, that's right, I was in mid-sentence. I want to strike official newspaper bids and reorganization. I look back, typically those have been held the second meeting of January, and I simply haven't had time to go through all of the different committees to make assignments and call the people that I'd like to appoint. So I want to table official newspaper bids and reorganization until the second meeting of January.
The bids aren't part of the reorg, and they are where they will have responded. So we do have their bids tonight.
Okay, I consider that as a part of the reorganization. So if it's, unless there's some real concern from the council.
It's, reorganization's fine, but the bids are here, they're not gonna change.
Okay. Agree with that?
I agree, we have the bids in the.
Yeah, because it is,
We can go ahead.
in the reorganization, there is one of the reorganization items is the official newspaper for the year. So that's fine, we can plug that in next year when we get to that. So we will do the official newspaper bids, but I'd like to put the reorganization off until next meeting.
So push a motion to accept the agenda with the one amendment.
Support?
Support.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Not in favor, say nay. I think everyone said aye. Thank you very much. Okay, now we're on number 3. So closed meeting, closed council meeting pursuant to statute 13D.05, employee misconduct allegations. I just have 2 quick questions. I'm assuming this is regarding an employee, and has that employee been informed of this meeting? In fact, let me ask one other question before that. Are there 2 councilors who asked to have this item put on the agenda?
We can describe more in detail in the closed meeting, but, it's related to something that is an employee issue. Pretty much what we would have to do at this point is we would have to call a motion to close the meeting, and
Mhm.
then we can explain.
Yeah, I understand the process, Kevin, I appreciate that, but first of all, I need to know whether, okay, I'll bypass the question about whether this individual has been informed, but, are we discussing an employee?
Yes.
An employee, okay.
This is just from past experiences. Typically, an item like that on the agenda has to be approved by the mayor or by 2 council members. Now, is that the case, or?
Well,
Cause it needs to be.
I would approve it right now because, part of this was brought to me as one of the few members of the Employee Relations Committee
I know,
that's
but
still
it takes
here.
2 council members to do that. You know, I wanna follow procedure correctly.
Is there-
We can have a special meeting or do something, you know, so. I mean, that's how it was always handled, anything like this on it. And I'm just talking about my experience, is that it's either the mayor or 2 council members. Cause in the case the mayor doesn't wanna put it on there, then 2 council members can say, yes, we want that item on there. Not that, and the reason I know that, cause that's the case that happened one time in my term, many terms, you know, so.
Well, and what I can say right now is without explaining more in a closed meeting.
Yeah, right.
I can say for sure, as I've been following this for about the past week or so, as a member of the Employee Relations Committee, I would say yes. So I don't know who
Yeah,
else.
I would say it still takes two council
Well, I
members to do
can
it.
say yes also, if
Okay.
that's what you need.
So,
But it had to be before tonight.
Okay.
well,
Well, I didn't know about
Right.
it before tonight.
this
Yeah.
didn't.
I mean, it had to been
Yeah, it
approved
wasn't-
before the agenda was
This,
put out.
this was talked
Okay.
about with the clerk,
Okay,
so.
Okay, that-
Yeah, I was aware.
How you feel, just say how you feel,
It
there's
is,
no.
it is a little bit
Yeah.
unusual because of the timing matters with the changeover
Yeah.
of everything.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to
If
follow
it
through here.
Worked the first meeting, it would probably be a little bit different, but this is something that we can't really hold off on.
Okay,
There's
So-
nothing that you can hold off on, so. But
I
anyway,
would like the,
as long as we're doing it
clerk
legally
treasurer
and correctly.
and secretary
So,
to
Otherwise,
be
you're.
aware that the mayor was not aware of this beforehand. The agenda came, on the weekend. I had requested this to be put out on Wednesday, and then again on Friday before noon on Friday, and it came out at about 9 o'clock, I think, on Friday night. And this is something I feel very strongly about, that for the counselors and the city council to do the job that they need to do for the city and for the citizens of the city, that they need to be well informed. And that's the reason for, point 9.14, we'll get to that later, but, I want to be sure that, all of the counselors are well informed and prepared before they come to this meeting, otherwise it's unfair to the citizens of the town. So, the agenda came on the weekend, and there really was no time to research this. Now, and what Steve said, I also had understood that that was the case, so I did follow up with city attorney, and he thought that was the case, although I need to point out that he did not give me a specific, statute on it. So I think the council needs to decide whether they, wanna go forward with this, or, whether this gets put off, and, first of all, the employee is notified beforehand, and, that it is in fact an employee that's being discussed.
Well, and like I said, and a lot more of this will become a lot more clear when we can actually discuss it in a closed meeting, but right now I think you have a first and a second for a motion, to close.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. One other comment that I wanna make, because the reorganization hasn't been accomplished yet, There is only one person on the Employee Relations Committee, and that would be you.
Actually, that's not true.
I just found out this myself, is I actually thought it was just me, but it turns out that the seating is not based on title of office, it was actually based on a person. The people that are on it is myself and Josh Carlson. I just found out today, I thought he was off because, being no longer on the council as of the 7th, I didn't think that he was a part of that, but I was just found out this morning, or today when I came in, that it's actually not tied to a council seat. It's just
The
based on a seat.
the 2018, excuse me, roster listed you and Lance and Josh as being the Employee Relations Committee. And both Josh and Lance are off the council. And new appointments have to be made. According to the document that I received from Linda, there are 2 open positions.
There will be until, after you, once you reorg, there will be.
Yeah.
Until you reorg, those people sit.
Okay. Do you need a quorum for the, I mean, Josh isn't here. Do you need a quorum for the Employee Relations Committee to?
No, I think Kevin's prepared to handle it. I think if we can just,
This appears to be terribly irregular, but I'm only one vote, and there's a motion and a second. So,
I would like this to come, it just seems like, it's a little inappropriate at tonight's meeting to be doing this, but, and again, I don't know the issue, but I had no ability to do any kind of investigating whatsoever on what this is. Did you contact the person that allegations were against? I'm not sure what the procedure is on that.
As soon as we can close, I can describe
Yeah.
more in detail on what's going about, but I
Answer one of your
I
questions.
don't wanna start answering before it's a closed meeting because of the nature of it.
That's my own feeling on this, and I'm just going by my past experience would be to table this and just have a special meeting on Thursday and talk about it. 3 days, I don't understand why that would be such a difficult thing.
Well,
seems reasonable to me.
I'm just saying, just based on my
part of
experience.
the meeting is to inform the rest of the counselors as to the nature of the issue. And that's part of the discussion, but again, I can't keep talking about
3 days
it.
would not be a big deal to me. I don't see that being I'm just giving my comments and people can vote how they vote, but I feel that this is just,
with what was
my
brought to
many
me,
years,
I
it just
think you
feels
can't
inappropriate to me, so. But anyway, that's my comment. And please put that in the minutes that I feel that way, just because I do, it just seems. But anyway, and
I
I
can
don't know
also
the issue, but
mention,
3 days would not be a big deal.
Since Counselor Steve mentioned the date Thursday, there will be another special meeting called for Thursday in any case. And basically can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, having 2 special meetings on the same night.
no,
I don't know if you
no,
can.
they're regarding 2 totally separate deals. They should not be combined.
Not combined, there would be 2 separate meetings.
Well,
Closing open, closing open. This whole closed meeting, I'd actually like to have some legal counsel as to what he thinks is what the appropriate thing would be to do. It just,
at your
I don't know, it just
consultant.
feels odd to me. Have you talked to
Yes, I have.
Andy Peterson? or-
Yes.
Yes, I have.
Okay. I don't know what he said, and I don't have anything that says what he says.
This
you know.
was,
I did as well, and I also talked at the League of Minnesota Cities, and they said, number 1, that the individual needs to be informed before the closed meeting. And then secondly, to ascertain that it actually is an employee. If it's not an employee,
It is an employee. Asked and answered, it is an employee.
Has he
It
been
is,
informed then too?
both parties are employees, excuse me.
supposed to be informed beforehand is what it sounded like.
That's not any, the advice I got from Andy. He knew what was happening.
Did
so-
do you have that in writing from
No.
Andy? Well, then that's, if I could see what it was for, I would definitely could vote for it or
I
not.
can't do that.
You know, I always said, in my years of mayor, I always get any opinion in writing there, otherwise it becomes hearsay. Who said, he said, you said, and that's just totally inappropriate. So, those are my thoughts.
Well, the thing I can say is that I've been following this for over a week now, and I'm in favor of it, because the only way we're gonna be able to inform all the members of the council of it is in a closed meeting. We did talk to Anderson, or to Peterson, and this method of trying to address it was essentially the guidance that we got on how to try to address it. I can't go into more of it until we actually have a closed
Yeah.
meeting to describe the nature of the problem.
I'm just saying, I have an issue with it just because there's no written document, and that seems to be an issue that comes along a lot, and in my time it was the same way. If you don't, if it isn't in writing, how do I know that's what he said?
Well, I'm rather suspicious of the fact that we spent almost 20 minutes already, and I'm assuming the council would like to be informed of this issue.
I mean, the
and this
council
is
can
the
vote
way
anytime you want.
Do that.
I'm just, but everyone gets to say their piece,
If you
so,
wanna call for a vote.
That would be you.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's-
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor of, having a closed meeting tonight, to discuss this issue, say aye.
I,
So, it was,
The names, those two are
okay.
ayes,
And nays?
no,
Nay. So the motion, let the record show that, it did not pass. And if you'd like to post this meeting and, do it properly, we can have a meeting, a special meeting. I'm totally open, and I also am very curious to know what this is. And if there's employee misconduct, we need to deal with it forthwith.
so
So-
in
so we
light,
can-
in
so
light
you can
of,
set, you can set a date right now.
in light of, the council turning down the closed meeting, I would recommend a motion right now to table items 9-12 through 9-15, because they would be related towards what the discussion during item 3 would have been.
Which one's Kevin?
9-12 through 9-15, and
Okay.
9-13 was already going to be tabled.
Yeah,
But I would put forward a motion to table 9-12 through 9-15 until we've had a chance to discuss item 3.
I have no problem with that.
Second the motion?
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Abstain. So it passes,
You abstained?
yes.
For what?
Well, the motion.
For what, for what
What?
cause?
Do I need to give a cause?
Usually.
You know, change my abstination to an aye, yes.
Yes, okay.
Sure, that's fine. No problem. Okay. Okay, so, point number 4. Approval of, previous minutes. It's a little bit difficult for the, previous, I'm sorry, for the new, counselors, because we weren't actually at the meeting.
But how do you actually handle that?
You just have to do it.
Well,
I mean,
I'm in a business where I can't just say, just because somebody
You're gonna
told
have to
me to
rely
do
on
it,
the-
to do it, I
You're gonna have to
can't.
rely on the advice of the two that are still seated here,
You know,
that was a true and correct.
yeah, I
Well,
wasn't at the meeting.
No, I
so-
know, that's why I'm saying you have to rely on your two counselors that are still seated, that were
So
there.
if they,
And you go through that.
if we just abstain, how would we do it? So
Well-
Typically, this council is responsible for approving them. I just saw it go on the list,
Yeah.
or somebody else had asked, so it's not, I mean, every council has to do it, there's always the change orders.
You know, the two that have said,
You can abstain if you want.
yeah, the two that have said, that they would approve them, are fine, upstanding citizens and counselors of the, representatives of the city, so I would go along with that, so, I'll call for a vote, all in favor of approving
We'll
first.
need a motion and a support there. I don't have one
So-
anyway.
Motion to approve previous council minutes.
Thank you.
I will support that motion.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approved.
Give me reasons for
Just lost the reservation at the Morgan. Okay, so we'll move into, public input. Yes, Tony?
Just to make sure that the record is clear and straight, I do not represent the Tower News here tonight, and especially the Tower News does not represent me. However, the editor of the Tower News, one of this community's oldest citizens, is my close personal and hope to be lifelong friend. I'll also mention that she's an original pioneer family on the Vermilion Range here. And that's my only association with that newspaper. However, I, like everyone else, can submit copy for publication, and I do so. Because of my emeritus status, I guess, they stick my name on the front of my letters, my correspondences, instead of at the end, like normally happens. But you'd have to ask them why that would be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. You're talking about Phyllis, she's one of my favorite people, so, and I apologize for misrepresenting your position.
No need to apologize. I just wanted to make that, I don't take my walking papers from Mr. Albertson, nor does he take them from me.
Okay,
I do what I do because I can.
mhm,
Yet still, we'll see
okay.
how far this administration goes. Not yours, Mr. Trump's.
Okay. Yeah, we'll stay away from the politics, Tony. You and I have had plenty of that. Okay, is there any other public opinion?
I have public input. And I know you've got a lot of important things to deal with, and, as a result, I hate to have to take any more of your time, but I do have to respond to a really repulsive, display by Linda Keith at the, December 19th council meeting, regarding the TIDA loan guidelines that she had recently placed in council packets. During this performance that she gave, she noted that I had informed Mr. Fitton that the set of guidelines provided to the council was not the version approved by TIDA. My email to Mr. Fitton is attached in the packet that I provided each of you. Contrary to Ms. Keith's claim and her purported evidence, TIDA never approved this version of the guidelines to the best of my knowledge. I recognize that fact immediately because of the final provision in the guidelines given to the council, which states that, quote, disbursements will only be made up to 50% of the total of the invoices submitted. 50% payment will be required by the applicant. TIDA never approved that language despite multiple attempts by Ms. Keith to insert that phrase into the guidelines. To understand that, you have to understand a short bit of history. I refer to Ms. Keith's own comments from the December 10th meeting during which she explained the history of this loan. She stated, quote, there were a bunch of conversations about how to set up the procedures, the criterias, and the whatnot. A couple of items that came out of that call was that TIDA would issue an economic development loan to Tower Vision 2025 for $125,000, unquote. The call she was referring to was with Chris Ishmael from IRRB, who was helping resolve a dispute we were having over the intent of this grant to TIDA. Ms. Keith had objected to paying out 100% on paid invoices that were presented by Tower Harbor Shores and Tower Vision due to her personal concern about whether Orland and his team had, quote, enough skin in the game. Mr. Kringstad undoubtedly recalls this dispute very vividly because he, like me, was frustrated by her efforts to obstruct this funding. Bottom line, it wasn't Linda's call. She had no role on TIDA, and she knew absolutely nothing prior to the phone call with Mr. Ishmael about the understanding and intent of the IRRB in regards to the grant to TIDA. She was not party to the meeting between Mr. Kringstad, Lars Onstead, Commissioner Mark Phillips, Economic Development Director Steve Peterson, and myself, during which we discussed this funding package. In that meeting, Commissioner Phillips and Mr. Peterson both expressed strong support for the townhome project. The IRRB had already invested millions in the harbor and were eager to see a successful project get underway. The commissioner proposed the $125,000 grant to TIDA to fill an identified funding gap. TIDA would serve as a pass-through entity to get the funds to Tower Harbor Shores as quickly as possible to address their initial cash flow limitation. IRRB officials well understood that the loan would not be secured and that was hardly a concern for them. At the same time that they approved this funding to TIDA, the IRRB provided straight-up grants to two other private developers working to advance their own projects in Hibbing and Ely, and they opted for a loan here because Tower Harbor Shores had indicated an ability to repay the funds once the project was completed, which would then become a valuable revolving loan fund for TIDA. This was a big win-win for the city. We met with the IRRB in February of 2017, but Ms. Keith spent months insisting that she would only pay 50% on paid invoices presented by Tower Harbor Shores or Tower Vision. I and others on TIDA were equally adamant that payment would be one-to-one on paid invoices, since this loan was intended to inject cash flow, not constrain it. Because of the impasse, I finally asked Mayor Carlson to intercede, and we then got Mr. Ishmael on the phone. That's when he confirmed that it was IRRB's intent to have loan funds paid out one-to-one on paid invoices. Linda's comments from the December 10th meeting confirmed this. One obvious question at this point is why would TIDA approve loan guidelines that called for 50% payout on invoices submitted when the IRRB indicated that paying out 100% on invoices was what they expected? This was just one of the reasons that we fought the language that Linda wanted, and which now appears in the guidelines that she has twice recently handed out to the council. I certainly don't dispute that we approved loan guidelines. As part of the IRRB grant, we needed to submit guidelines, and we worked quickly to do so, using guidelines from the Hibbing EDA as our template, making only minor modifications. That's confirmed by my April 2017 TIDA report, which is also attached there. I've also attached a copy of the Hibbing guidelines in your packet. The Hibbing guidelines make no reference to paying out 50% on paid invoices. The only changes we made to these guidelines were to switch out Tower for Hibbing, along with a couple other adjustments which can be seen in the April 6, 2017 TIDA minutes, which I've also attached. Note there's no reference to our approving the provision Ms. Keith keeps insisting on. In fact, I suggested to Mr. Fitton in the email that I wasn't aware of any city that has such a provision in a business loan guideline. During her performance last month, Ms. Keith claimed several cities had similar provisions, including Northfield, Hanover, New Ulm, Sauk Center, and others. I asked her to provide those guidelines and indicate where it showed a 50% payout on submitted invoices. She provided the guidelines, which only confirmed that none of them have such a provision. Instead, they include that the local economic development authorities in these communities would limit their total involvement in funding of projects to 50% or less of the total project cost. Now, this was part of the Hibbing guidelines as well, but that's an entirely separate issue, which relates only to the size of the total loan, not how funding is dispersed. Those, if you have a $250,000 project, the guidelines would say you could only have a loan up to $125,000. But once the loan is approved, then the payment is typically one-to-one. I mean, that's how every loan works. Once if you're approved for a $20,000 car loan, you don't get $10,000 once you pay for the car. If the city of Tower approves a commercial rehab loan for $20,000 and the business involved comes with $20,000 in invoices for related work, the $20,000 is dispersed, not half that amount. I've never seen language like Ms. Keith insisted on putting in these loan guidelines, and her claims to the contrary are simply wrong. Apparently she misunderstood what I was referencing in my email to Mr. Fitton, but decided to engage in frankly hysterics and personal attacks at a council meeting rather than be professional and seek clarification. Mr. Fitton, I think, bears some of the responsibility for that as well. His lack of objectivity on this and other issues is concerning me, as I expressed in my email. Certainly, no one on TITA suggested that we should pay out 50% on invoices. Our job was to get the funds to Tower Harbor Shores as quickly as possible. It was only Ms. Keith who resisted paying out the funds as the IRRB intended. Of course, I'm well aware at the end of the day that Linda writes up these documents and she puts what she likes into the council packet. I have to note that since the installation of the video camera in the council chambers back in November, city council meetings have been misused by a number of city officials to engage in what can only be described as theater designed to play to the camera. It's been defamatory at times and grossly irresponsible, including in the description of the Tito loan, which has repeatedly come under attack without basis. Both I and Mr. Kringstad have been accused of corruption by the ambulance director over this loan, which is ridiculous. The IRRB, which provided this funding, has raised no concerns whatsoever about TITA's process, and this grant was closed out by the agency over a year and a half ago, according to Mr. Ishmael. When Ms. Keith told the council back in December that she still needed to submit additional invoices to close this out, that was not true. This grant was fully closed out in August of 2017. Mr. Ishmael confirmed that, as did Cheryl Kachiber. Rather than a thank you for showing initiative and obtaining significant funding for a city-sponsored project, TITA received nothing but grief and obstruction from Ms. Keith from the start, and more recently reckless allegations from the ambulance director, who has never once asked me nor Mr. Kringstad a single thing about it. If this is how city officials treat people who volunteer their time on TITA or other committees or commissions to help the city of Tower, it will only further discourage community involvement. I know it's a sour taste in my mouth. What's astonishing to me and many others is that the previous council did absolutely nothing in the face of this kind of unprofessional behavior. I and many others in this community are hoping that this new council will take such matters far more seriously. Thank you.
I do have a few questions for that to follow up on. A couple of things here. One, you do reference multiple times professionalism on the part of staff, city staff and counselors up until this point. I think one of the issues that, and I have had conversations quietly, both with you and with Jody, about appropriate measures and appropriate procedures of asking questions and things like that. Some things that are rather disturbing, and I agree that there is a portion of theater going on. Part of this is I have been called on my personal line at home asking for answers to questions, and when I have, at first I started off rather genial about it, and then when it became more and more pointed from you personally, I took exception to it because it was crossing a line and assuming a relationship that is not there, mostly because frankly, and I'll be rather blunt about this, I am not your puppet on the council. I do have my own opinions about things, and there are some things that I am not going to necessarily share openly all the time. But this got all the way to the point where I was getting emails on my work email, and I'm not talking about my city account, I'm talking about my work email. I don't think any other counselors were probably questioned as much as I was in the last 6 to 12 months. And it even got so much to the point that even my board chair, who is kind of my boss, was asking me questions at my work email, to which I responded once, both before a meeting verbally and once later on by email, saying how inappropriate this is because it puts me in an impossible position. Because I have to say no to my boss now about questions regarding things that are going on at the city. And it got so far as is having to tell the board chair, saying, if you email me again, this will be a board grievance at the school board. The fact, and I have personally seen shouting matches by you to other staff members here at the city that go way beyond normal, that go way beyond what is acceptable. And
I
you're
don't
gonna
believe
sit,
you've seen that, Kevin.
yes, I did, right here in the council chambers.
Well,
There was, Linda was standing right there, Josh was sitting right here, I was sitting right here, and you were literally shouting.
well,
And
I was being shouted at as well.
not up to that point, but the way that you have treated people, and you have always spun this, that it is everybody else that is an issue, that's extremely problematic, and you wonder why people are becoming so defensive. Here's a good example of it. As for responding to situations, you have a giant megaphone in the form of the newspaper. And for at least a year now, we've heard nothing but negative comments about the city constantly. Things about Linda, things about Steve, things about, even when we try to answer some of the things for you, like a good example being the ambulance report on many of the questions that you asked about.
No, that didn't respond to any of the questions that I asked about. But I don't want, I don't know if you're gonna.
I'm ready to
I
cut this
provided
off.
public input. This,
Well, the question I
typically, public input is provided.
You're asking, you're throwing all these things out and you're looking for
You're not even
responses.
addressing the issues here that I raised.
I'm trying to get to it, so give me a second. You're putting this in a situation where you're constantly always putting someone else in the worst of light. And yet, even when answers are given to you, again, this is what it ends up getting shouted down. And you're looking for responses, and yet this is what you get. The questions I actually had related to some of this is, the closeout part, you keep claiming that this is closed out, but when that claim was made before, a couple of days after that, I was talking with Linda and I saw the screen where it was still open. So on the IRRB website where the grant pieces are, I saw it still open with my own eyes.
If they haven't updated their website, that wouldn't be a huge surprise. I mean, you can call Chris Ishmael or Cheryl Pachever at the IRRB anytime you would like, and they will tell you that it was closed out in August of 2017, and he said they would not close it out unless they had all of the needed paperwork in order. That's the way they process this.
That's
And here's
okay.
the thing, I don't necessarily wanna get in a huge argument about this. I mean, I made an offhand comment to you in a private email, and that got turned into this whole thing. I mean, it was never my intent to make a big deal out of it, I just mentioned that to you. You were the one who decided to hand it off to Linda, she's the one who decided to make this huge deal out of it. It could have just been a private, comment that I made to
Which
you.
one are you referring to?
The
Is
one
it-
about the TITA guidelines.
Okay, so that was actually.
You were the one who decided to turn this into a big issue.
That's actually my second question, is related to the guidelines parts. And in here, it says, under the review criteria, demonstrated repayment ability, equity commitment, adequate collateral coverage. Under this part, wouldn't that part be a part of that? And the biggest question of this is because I've also heard it mentioned that there are already like $300,000 of expenses already. If the issue were showing the 50%, how hard would it be to submit the other 50%, and the issue would be over? I mean, it's the absolute pulling teeth it
There
has been.
isn't an issue.
Yeah, there has, because we have only half of it. We only have 125,000 of invoices at the city, and we've been asking for months for the rest of the invoices and got nothing but stonewall all the time. If the expenses were there, as I've heard people say that it's already been, this should have been a closed matter with 5 minutes of, here's scan of
Kevin,
these and
if
send
you
me
wanna
in.
talk about this afterwards, I would be
I
happy to do
suggest
that.
you-
I don't think this is even, this is
Yeah, I agree,
insane.
we should move on.
I do wanna move on this. There's several issues like this that are coming back time and again at the council meetings, and I don't wanna waste a lot of time here at the council meetings to resolve them. That's not to say that they don't need to be resolved. And we have to have special meetings or bring in special, analysts that can hear both sides and mediate and come to a resolution, then I think that's what we should do. As I say, this is not the only one that keeps coming back. We're sort of getting into a dueling newspapers thing as well, with two different stories, and it's confusing the people of the city, I think. I would like to see these things get resolved, because we have so many things that we wanna do in this city to productively grow the city, build economic resilience, and I have to be careful not to get on my soapbox, but we wanna do all of those things. So I would like to find a way to resolve this once and for all. And I think that the one way of doing so is that there is a precedent now. We have the city has, the city and the Tower Harbor Shores group has constipated that loan and is paying interest on it and will pay it back. And the process that they followed, I believe from my time when I was involved with that group, that it was the correct one. And I think that what we need to do is find the appropriate committee to review the guidelines for loans that come to us from IRRB or from any other source, and make sure that the criteria for how those loans are paid out and how they're paid back are clear. So I would take that on as I would want to see this council take that on as a project for the future. Does that seem reasonable to Kevin, to you, and to you, Marshall, to resolve it? Because I think it's a moot point now from my former group, the Tower Harbor Shores group, and the rest of it could just cause too much argument and consume time at these meetings.
Well, I mean, the appropriate group to look over the loan guidelines would be TIA, because they're the ones that drafted them in the first place.
Okay.
So, I mean, neither here nor there, but.
The other thing is too about the loan, whatever, call to the IRRB and a letter written by someone explaining their position. Again, I go back to this.
We looked into that, and TIA, or the IRRB basically said, follow your loan guidelines.
Yeah,
That was the answer we got back.
okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's move on.
We, Linda, let's make a point that the issue of guidelines for disbursement of loans coming from sources like the IRRB and the payback will be finalized by TIDA, cast them in stone, and then we won't have this issue in the future when the current loanees or the Tower Harbor Shores group pays back, and that money is available to lend out again.
Sorry, I just wanted to submit those are actually the copies of the loan guidelines that I was referring to in those other cities.
All right, thank you very much, thank you for your input, both of you. And my apologies for the time that consumed. Is there any other public input?
I have some, I have some public input, Orland, if I may have, since you've opened the door. Normally, public input is reserved for comments upon things on the agenda, but since we've been allowed to listen to Mr. Hellenberger wax eloquently for 20 minutes, I have some things to add. I might also add that you also referred to that we're in some sort of a newspaper war here. We're not in some sort of newspaper war, but the truth remains. Orland Kringstad and Tower Vision 2025 borrowed somewhere like $125,000 or $126,000 from this city. The city got the money from the IRRB, but that's really neither here nor there once the check was cashed by the city. Orland, you asked to make interest-only payments on that loan until June of 2018. I argued on your behalf in this council. I believe I was sitting back there by Mr. Marla at that moment. You were granted that. You were to begin repaying the loan in June. To date, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, to the best of my knowledge, at least on 12/31, payments had not commenced. And at the close of the business year, the interest payments weren't even current. As you promised at the city meeting on the candidates back in October down the road in the Civic Center. Now all of a sudden, Though we weren't privy to seeing the paperwork at the last meeting when it was approved, apparently Tower Harbor Shores, yet another LLC, is now the beneficiary of paying that loan back. Being facetious, I guess. It's amazing what people will agree to. You asked how we could resolve this thing, it'd be real easy. Get your checkbook out and write the city of Tower $125,000 check, because this issue is not going to go away until every dime of that money is paid back. And as it remains, you are in arrears and in default by more than half a year. Because albeit, Mr. Helmberger tells us, the TIDA didn't do this or did do that, they're only an advisory board to this council. This city council, to the best as I can determine by looking at all the minutes that have been approved and published in the various places they have been, has never approved extending those payments beyond June. So I'm with you. You don't want to waste your time. It's real easy. Don't allow Mr. Helmberger to capture this city council room for 20-some minutes and think that's the end of the issue. $125,000 payment would be greatly appreciated and would get your administration off to a good start. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, at the time that I was involved with the Tower Harbor Shores group, the intent was always, the key was always to begin those payments at the time of the beginning of the building of the townhomes. And I'm no longer involved. I'm no longer involved, but Mr. Wood, Michael Wood is here. If something has changed, I wouldn't know that, but as far as I know, the loan, the principal on that loan is to begin being repaid when the townhomes begin being built.
To the best of my knowledge, your council would need to make that change because heretofore it has not happened to the best of the public record that I can find. And I'm actually pretty good at finding the public
Well,
record.
we'll have to research that. By the way, Tony, are you filming the proceedings here?
Am I recording you? Yes.
Recording? Okay. Because at the beginning, I thought I'd asked if anyone's recording, just let us know that you are.
Oh, that's a requirement, Mr.?
I just think it would be.
This whole recording thing started with Mr. Helmberger playing around with his tape player over there some 6 months ago.
Okay. Be aware that this is being recorded, so, and that's fine. I just, I know it's not a requirement, but I just prefer that people know that they are being recorded. Is there any other public input? Richard, you had your hand up.
Something non-confrontational,
Thank you.
and there shouldn't be any response. These two gentlemen have taken up a tremendous amount of time. I am inviting the council to a meeting on February 13th for broadband. We had our first meeting, and we got some stuff together. There's $70,000 that's going to be awarded to this broadband group in this area. And it's a visionary group, it's kind of a vision, what we want. And we definitely want the city council there.
What time is that,
And
Richard?
it's gonna be at 5:30, thanks. I'll
Civic
send that,
Center, or,
pardon?
or at the Civic Center, or?
Yeah, at the
Okay.
Civic Center.
Okay, thank you very much.
I thought it
Oh,
was gonna be at the
okay, it's at the
Legion.
Legion.
Yeah.
That's
At the
right,
Legion,
it's at the
okay.
Legion.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
thank you very much for being involved in that project. It's going to be vitally important for the growth of the town. And Joan, before you run off, I just want to thank you also because you were one of the ringleaders in getting the broadband going with Blandon. So thank you very much. And Richard, thank you very much for being involved in that. So is there any other public opinion? Public input, excuse me. If not, we'll move on to correspondence. Linda, 6.1, Minnesota Department of Health, PHM compliance.
Yep, you have a letter in your packet, there's no action required, it just says that we passed again.
What does it mean?
It
Since
means,
I'm not an expert.
it means that the trihalosthetic methanes are within standard drinking water limits.
Okay.
And those are after Senishin?
Yeah, they can, after, I think it's 30 or 40 years of continual drinking, a certain amount of water per day, you can end up with. And this is something that Matt
So
will watch
how often do they do this?
quarterly.
Oh, okay, so it's pretty regular.
I have a question. Are the water samples, do they differ from point to point in the city in places?
Sometimes.
Some water worse than others? Because when I was visiting people this fall, I met with several people that were very concerned that they had to buy water. They were drinking store-bought water because they were afraid to drink their drinking water. And I have a couple of addresses that are marked down that I said I would come back. In fact, I visited one today. And if water testing can be done for those people who have a specific concern, I guess I would like to do
I
that.
think Matt Tubo told me one time, like,
Yeah,
he
takes
talked to
me-
me about that one
yeah,
time,
from
about
various
moving
different
around,
places.
especially if those who had a problem, they would
Certain
be
one-
interested in that.
Yeah,
so.
certain ones can be, certain ones cannot, so
Okay.
it kinda depends.
Well, if it's,
These have some pretty strict requirements, the trihalosthetic methanes, but,
Well, we could call them and.
yeah, if
ask
you're
them.
looking, some of the other ones, like the mercury one he does, there's a little bit more play, there's a lead one that he does that has more play, but
Yeah, 'cause he indicated to me if I knew anyone that
the
had an
best thing would be to
issue,
start getting those,
Oh.
get those addresses to me, so I can get them to him, so we can
Yeah.
Okay.
figure
Well,
out what we can do.
I have it marked down in my notes, which apartments, one was at the apartments over here, and there was one house. And I will visit them again. The individual I visited today wasn't home. And then I'll get those addresses to Matt so that he can do a test.
You should actually get them to me, so that, cause then there's also a report that I can send them as well.
Oh, that's much better. I'll get them to you then. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, moving right along, the reports. SEH engineering report, Jason, you?
Yeah, we submitted our January reports, a little bit longer than normal. We do have a lot of ongoing projects. I have nothing else to add, open to questions if there are any.
What projects are you working on right now besides the trail and the harbor and
They're all
anything?
in that
Or
list.
on-
Yeah, they're all listed in here. There's,
Okay.
you know, some of them, I don't even know if you wanna call them projects, but they're
Sure.
tasks that we're currently
Okay,
involved in. So, every month we've been submitting, what we're working on and, whether there's any updates from last month.
okay. So like, when you send these reports, you also send the completed kind of a thing too, so, I mean, I'm new, so I don't.
Yeah, we can edit it however the council desires.
I just thought it would be nice to see, you know, especially, we'll know to the.
Yep.
You know. if
Yeah,
someone
usually we
knew it.
write project is complete or,
Put
you know,
project completed or
yeah.
something, just,
And we can leave it on for a month, so it's completed and
Yeah.
will be removed next month.
yeah.
We can, easily do that.
I would think
This is a question for both Jason and Linda. Will there be a meeting scheduled for SEH to go over and give a more in-depth overview of what these projects are, especially for, I guess for all of us, but Rachel, you probably haven't had an overview yet? Okay, I think that would be very beneficial if we could do that. Can that be scheduled?
Yep.
Of course, yeah. Or before a meeting or something, or separate, what are your hours?
I'm usually 8 to 5.
Oh, okay, so it have to be,
Yeah.
that's 5 days a week, of course.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Okay. Any questions on the SEH engineering report? The ambulance director is not here, and the fire chief report is not here. Is there anyone else in the audience that, plans on giving those reports?
He has his reports here, and I was gonna try to give them for him, but I don't think I wanna do that, and I think we should give him, table these two items till the next meeting and give him the opportunity. He put together quite a packet here of information, and I think we should have the opportunity to present it, so, especially.
Is that in our packets?
No,
So we
he
could
had-
read through it at least.
He had copies for you, I think these are his copies for you, so.
So next, by next meeting, we can read through it.
Yeah, I really think he should be here to, I was gonna
Then
try
he
to.
can explain, I'm
Yeah.
all good with that.
Yep, well, but I think we should table those two items, he's out of there.
Maybe,
I wanna make sure these are what he wants.
Oh, okay.
If these are, I will get them to you.
Okay.
But I don't wanna do anything
okay,
without.
cool.
They are at a structure fire right now, otherwise he would be here, so it's not a lack of attendance, it's
Okay.
No,
Forgive my, being rusty again, but, when we table something here, does that need to be,
voted on.
specifically voted on?
not of this caliber, I mean, something like we did earlier, yes, but.
Okay, is everyone good with that? Okay. And then the, police report.
There's a copy of that in your packet.
Okay. I haven't had time to review this, but, have you reviewed it?
Yeah, they're, pretty standard, it's, they had a couple of arrests last month for drinking and driving. They both completed some training on de-escalation, which if anybody saw the results and the tape of the training incident, that became a key part of that incident, so de-escalation training is a good thing for them, and, I know that Jason has gone to a training right now, and that's why no one is here on behalf of, and then Dan is on vacation, so.
What's the TZE shift?
Towards zero deaths, they're sponsored by the State Patrol, and the State Patrol actually funds their wages for those shifts. And it's a good way to get free enforcement for your community.
Okay. Linda, thank you for giving that report, police report. 7 point, any other questions?
Did the police chief ever come?
Yeah, he does, like I said, he is on vacation.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And normally
Just curious.
he sends his first officer, but Jason is out
Okay.
trading, so,
I just-
and I think Keith is out patrolling right now, so.
Okay.
Yeah, normally there is an officer
Okay.
here.
Any other questions on the police report? Okay, TDEC, Tower Economic Development Authority.
They did not meet since the last meeting.
We'll
I
be
know.
meeting this week, I think we're supposed to meet this Thursday.
I thought we tabled it till we had a full group again.
Oh, they canceled again?
Yeah,
They never scheduled it. Okay.
so we're on a
So
hold.
they
I think I heard that also. Joan, I think I heard that,
Oh, because of the reorganization.
General
Yeah,
was off
okay,
until
okay.
February. Okay, thank you. And, Airport Commission Report, 7.6.
We also did not meet over the holidays. Our
Okay.
scheduled meeting would have been Christmas Day, so we decided to throw it.
Okay. Is there any other discussion or questions regarding any of the, reports from officers, engineers, commissions, committees?
Have a motion to approve.
Hearing none, I'd like to hear a motion to approve.
So moved.
Support?
That would be for 7-1 and 7-4.
Yeah.
Support.
Okay, and, just, for further discussion, we have tabled, 7.2 and 7.3, and, when the ambulance director and fire chief, if he happens to come in while we're still meeting, he's welcome to give his report, otherwise we'll wait until the next meeting.
Yep. I'll be back. Not on a structure fire.
All in favor of accepting, the report, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Thank you very much. Unfinished business was really simple. Let's go to new business, 9.1, Valencia Enterprises, Peter Billing, pay estimate number 6.
You have another pay estimate from Lency for $203,300 for the building work. That would need to be approved, so we can pay them. And I did see Brian reached out to Mike and asked them some things about the roof and the concrete. I can attest that the roof is not done.
Yeah, no, he's aware of that. It's
Okay.
partial payment. They have the wrap and the underlayments,
Okay.
on the roof. The concrete's done, but they do have materials for siding, metal siding and roof on site, so
Okay.
it's not a full payment, but it's a partial payment.
Okay. Okay, that works for it.
Okay, very good. Then, 9 point,
I need a motion to approve that.
yeah, motion to approve, so you have a motion to approve each one of these?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah, is there a motion to approve 9.1, pay estimate number 6?
So moved.
Is there support?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, approved. 9.2, estimate number 6A.
In your packet is an, pay estimate 6A for the site work for $7,600. And I think that this is good and you should go ahead and approve it. And Jason's nodding his head too.
SEH has reviewed it and, recommends approval.
Okay. Okay, is there any discussion, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And support?
I'll support.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? TNT aggregates pay estimate number 2.
This would be for the cultural center, the old church. This is the second pay estimate for them. We are the fiscal agent for this project. So there isn't really an approval on our side. They've already looked this over. They've added their stamp of approval. We just pay the bills for them.
Motion to approve,
So moved.
support?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? I have one thing, just, in a sentence or two, how are they doing on that project? Does anyone have, background?
No.
No, I know they
Get one
did
of-
some, they did all the groundwork, they did
Yeah.
some concrete work, they built if you go by there, there's a concrete block thing that goes up, that's for an elevator shaft, so I get, from what I can see.
It's coming along.
It seems like it's coming along, so.
This would be probably, about 2/3 of their grant that they've spent at this time. So I would say 2/3 of the work should be done.
Okay. All right, Secretary, did I call for a vote on that one?
Yeah.
I did, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved? I'm not in my head. 9.4, resolution, 2009-19, 001, this is a resolution to rescind, auto mutual aid.
I'm assuming all of you, maybe you weren't Steve Abrahamson at the meeting that, Altenberg spoke at this. It actually wasn't Teller's request, but in order to process the request, the county wanted an actual resolution passed by the council, and what this is right now, like tonight, when the fire alarm went out for the house in Briding, Greenwood and Tower were automatically paged at the same time. And what's going to happen in the future is that only for structure fires would that be the case. When they get alarm codes or things like that, they would page that responsible party's department. And then if they need to get those other departments, then they would call, we're still mutual aid, we will still provide
Oh, okay.
help, but we're not auto
So you don't
mutual aid.
automatically show up to.
Right,
Oh, I got
so
it.
we're not, a couple of the departments were having some pain about showing up to a lot of the CO2 alarms, the water alarms, and things like that, to sometimes find out they were just nothing.
Okay,
And so this was maybe a way to reduce some of the unnecessary,
so,
but for structure fires, it still will be, all three departments will get called immediately.
makes sense.
So we need a motion to approve the resolution.
Correct.
So moved.
Second.
Support?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. 9.6, Neo Electric Solutions, pay estimate number 2.
Well, you just gotta skip one here.
9.5.
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry, I already checked that one off, sorry about that. 9.5, transfer ownership of property.
What this is the property that the new, manufacturing building sits on for TITA, we call it the Lampa building, is actually on City of Tower property. The note with the IRRB is in the name of TITA, and you cannot record a note on property you don't own. So the city needs to grant this property to TITA.
Okay.
I don't think there'd be any reason anybody would not wanna do this.
Okay. Motion to approve,
So moved.
support?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, now it's approved. So now 9.6, Neo Electric Solutions, pay estimate number 2.
Correct, this is a pay estimate for work down at the airport. SEH's, airport group has already looked this over, Sean McMahon given his approval, and I believe this would be payout minus the retainage till spring.
So what, if I may ask, what electrical work?
This was wind cones,
Okay.
signage, and, new wind sock.
Okay. That's what I figured, but I wasn't sure with the theme moving it one day.
Yep, they put some, nighttime lights for nighttime landings.
Okay,
And then change the location of the windsock, or wind cone, I guess you call it, and reestablish a new one.
Very good. Motion to approve?
So moved.
second,
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Nays? Okay, 9.7, cemetery land transfer.
What this is unfortunately, after all these years, it has come to light that the cemetery does not own property wherein which housed the little
it's a little like storage shed.
house
Yeah.
thing that they put the remains in for the winter period. That is a bad thing that the cemetery doesn't own the property that it's on, so they would like to get title. Unfortunately, right now, the housing, unfortunately, I don't know how you look at it, the housing corporation owns that property. They have a note with the Department of Agriculture which prevents them from just giving the property to the cemetery association. So they have to sell it for at least somewhat close to fair market value, which they've agreed on a price of $2,000. The next stage of this would actually be asking somebody like SEH to, maybe give us a legal description and some office survey points that are here, which I've already done and they were willing to do so. And then also, pop this over to Andy Peterson and his group to do the, transfer of the deed and the recording in that portion. And I think we could save some of these costs, but what they're looking for from the city, in short, is $1,000 more than what we normally give them to cover, that purchase price of purchasing that piece that the building is on.
So the township and the city.
So the
would be-
township-
And we'd share the
Yeah,
legal costs.
yeah, and I think it would be pretty small for a pretty easy transfer with
Yeah,
with all the parties willing.
Right, yeah,
And
right.
usually it's when they're not willing that you have the,
Yeah.
I researched this a little bit and actually went up and looked at the property. I'm still getting used to the neighborhood, so, and took some pictures. What I understand is that they're estimating the legal costs at $500, so that would be split.
right, when
So-
Tim was thinking, Tomsich, sorry, that we would go to an outside attorney and I'm like, I don't know why we just wouldn't handle this with our own staff, why we wouldn't deal with our own attorney that we already have hired. And then, as far as the legal description, we already have an engineering group that's perfectly capable of providing it
Yeah,
for us. So I think when he put this letter together with Leonard, they were anticipating having to hire somebody for both of these functions just cold off the street, where I think we can get a much better deal out of Andy and SEH for their time. So that would be my proposal, is to shoot it to them and then agree to pay the $1,000 for the property. And Briding is meeting, I think, if I remember correctly, it's tomorrow to take the same issue up on their agenda. And Tim felt pretty confident that they would go for it.
Will you then convey to Tim to the township administrator?
Yep, here, we already have a little system we already got that covered.
Okay. So this resolution number, 2019-02.
That's for a different thing, that was for the Cheetah property. This has.
For the one at the cemetery land.
Oh, I'm
master.
sorry, it was, I'm looking at 9.5, it's 9.6.
Oh, no, we're on 9.7, I thought.
Yeah. We're way past the other.
Yeah, you're right. I'm still getting used to using this book.
Okay, 9.7, anyways, that's,
Yeah.
cemetery, so right now what I need is the council's commitment to spend $1,000.
Yeah.
Cause I don't have it in the budgeted line for.
Is there a motion?
I would make that motion.
Okay. Yeah, and I finally found it here too.
Okay.
So you're gonna second? Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, the 9.8 disc golf project.
Yes, that is, a project that was actually first proposed to TIDA. One of the questions that's come up now, we're at one part of an impasse where, this group has been out there, they've identified that is the most pristine topography in all the world of disc golf, which I don't know what all that is, but they swear that this is world-renowned topography. The only thing we don't know is, and you cannot use Land Explorer to be relied on for property lines, I don't know if what they're proposing is all within the parcel that we own. And I would need permission to engage the services of SEH to help me, make sure that we're staying within their property lines. And then we did get, initial permission from the county that if it does encroach into theirs, that they would look at a long-term lease. They have a pit on that 40, so they would not be willing to let it go. This would be right north of the ski trail parking lot. I see you trying to think where this is.
Oh, yeah, kind of, yeah.
Right north
Oh,
of there.
yeah.
Yep,
So it'd be on the.
the west side of
Yeah,
135.
kinda cool.
Yep.
I parked in town back there, so
It was pristine, Steve.
well, I don't know if that's maybe a little bit over the top, but yeah, it's been logged in there, so it's
But
not
yeah,
pristine, but it's very scenic and back in there, so.
So to get the ball rolling, and what's in your packet here is a quote for an 18 hole as well as a 9 hole. And to get the ball rolling, I need first to address where it is, if it's on our property, if I need to get that lease and whatnot, and then I'll be back at you, talking about the money once we have that. But I think first we need to narrow down the property, and I'd just like the permission to engage the services of SEH to do that.
Okay, got a motion?
Entertain a motion. Yes, I entertain a motion. Is that a motion?
Oh, the motion to allow Linda to
Yes.
research the Prodigy disc golf.
Support?
Yeah, second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
I said aye also.
Thank you
So
very much.
that's- Okay, the official newspaper bids.
Okay, they are sealed, so I unfortunately don't have copies for everybody, I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. It's good.
There are two rates on here, one is for the legal, and then one is for, the display ads. The bulk of our advertising is legal. So it looks like on these quotes, the legal rate for Timber J is .0476. And the legal rate for the Tower News is .0492. The display ad rate is $2.45 for the Tower, for Timber J, excuse me.
Say again?
The Timber J's display ad rate is $2.45. And the display ad rate for the Tower News is $2.50. Anybody want to see if they can.
Is there, is that the only criteria? Do you look at the circulation,
We
What-
used to
what-
look, we used to look at who had, somebody at the meeting so that there was accurate coverage.
Yeah,
And so now both papers do have somebody covering the meeting.
okay.
And then, so I think now it's pretty much cost.
I know nothing about that whole, I never did
You know, that
understand that
formula.
whole thing. It's like the,
I heard that one.
Okay, we can save some time here. So this is Timber J and this is, wait a minute.
Two rates that you're looking for.
This one is Timber J here, yeah,
This one here
and this is
that
Timber
one there.
News. Okay,
Those are the two that you're comparing.
okay. Okay, yeah. I wrote mine down right.
So it's
I only heard
Yeah,
four
I
seven
believe it's
six, I didn't hear eight four
the,
seven six.
the heat rate
Oh, yeah, okay.
and then the display ad rate.
what it is.
And before it,
Sorry, Kevin, I did the same thing.
What do those numbers actually mean? Cause I
Yeah.
have no
Thank you
clue.
for
the
asking.
price per column inch,
So, so for,
and the legal size is slightly different.
so the league, yeah, so, I'm just trying to get it in my mind.
I'm just looking for the smaller numbers.
What that,
The smaller number,
Oh.
is what you're looking for.
still like to know what that means, so.
You could have a study session on it.
Please.
So for every inch, is that a square inch or is that a
It's a column.
column inch? So what does a column inch look like?
Open up a paper, and the.
Is there a dimension to that column inch?
For, there's different ones for different,
Huh?
the legal ones, it's the
Yeah,
standard
let's just go,
column.
so.
But display ads can be any,
Oh.
usually go half page, quarter page. Correct?
Usually a lot less than that.
And, I mean, down to way to small sizes.
If I may, I don't really understand how they get to the number anymore, it's been
Okay.
20 years since
Oh,
I figured
okay.
it out. But that number, that 47 or 40, 50,
Okay,
that number is calculated by applying all the variables to create a number which shows the true price.
oh, I gotcha.
So the lower number, like Mr. Helmberger said, would be less expensive than the higher number
Of course.
to accommodate for everybody's discrepancies in rulers, I guess.
That one to that. So this one's lower on this one, but this one's lower on this one.
Yeah.
So how does this impact?
The one that we do the most advertising of is the .0 number.
Okay.
We do the most legal, cause most of our bid notices are legals, our audit notices are legals. Election notices, even though we're not gonna have an election this year, hopefully somebody. And, those will be legals.
If these rates were applied, to both the legal and display for 2018, which would come out lowest? I mean, are there, you said there's more legal,
I wanna
What?
say, I didn't look this up for 2018. Off of my memory, I only think we did 2 display ads. I wanna say one was Randy's retirement and the other one about 2 or 3 display ads that we did that in 17.
Okay, so the,
So this would be the low bidder.
hmm?
So this would be the low bidder if we're using the legal. 'Cause that's the one that gets used more.
Okay. I was just curious about, now you say you don't take into consideration circulation?
No, it's not, we don't, no. It's not part of the criteria that you have to.
Okay, then it appears that, Tower News is lower on the legal rate. Timberjay is lower on the display ad rate. So the, annual expenditure, for one over the other is your estimate?
I don't have the budget number in the top of my head, no, I'm sorry, I don't. The advertising budget's split between a few lines anyway, cause different departments have it. You, the council, have it for all the, legal ones that are required by the council. Ambulance has a couple that they put in, fire has a couple, I have a couple as a clerk that I have to do for the audit, so I couldn't tell you our total operating, or total, publishing budget. I'd have to look, I mean, I can tell you later, but not right this second. I wish I knew all the budget numbers by heart, but
Oh, there's a lot of numbers out there, don't feel bad. Is there a motion?
The motion would be to award to the low bidder, which would be Tower News.
Okay,
So I can move that.
is there support?
I'll support.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor of, Tower News being the official newspaper, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's Tower News. Okay, the next two, items are both, say, ambulance and fire department. Steve, welcome. You gonna take your normal chair
Oh,
here?
you guys didn't go through that yet?
No, we skipped over.
They tabled this,
Oh.
cause I didn't wanna read it for you.
Oh, I just need one for
And
myself.
I made a,
Do you wanna just either table and get this at the next meeting, cause now we're on this.
Oh, if they, it's up to them, right, it's up to them.
You wanna backtrack, or do you wanna leave them tabled?
Okay, well, whatever you wanna do it.
You wanna get 10 and 11 done first and then.
Yeah.
Backtrack?
yeah, let's go, okay, let's
Okay,
go
here.
9.10, Steve, if you wanna do ambulance department personnel changes.
I can do that, I put these in your packet anyway, for the, which one do I have first, sorry?
9.10,
No, I mean, what, fire or ambulance?
ambulance.
Okay, for the ambulance department, it would be Bob Dale, Jesse Gornick, Riley Lamprey, Kim Maddle, and Andy Sortman. A couple moved, one moved out, two are moving out of the area, one is returning to school, one has some family coming in, and one has returning.
Me too.
So.
So we just need a motion to accept their resignation.
How many are on the ambulance department now, Steve? Take them off. Oh,
Hang on.
You can.
Yeah.
I'll get to it in a minute, yeah, it's in this.
Okay, is there a motion to accept,
So moved.
support,
Support.
any further discussion? All in favor of approval of the personnel changes, ambulance personnel changes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion approved. And then, Steve, are you taking 9.11 or is that?
I'll just take that one too, that we can do Brett over there. Bob Dale has asked to retire from the fire department, he's a long-standing member, but, after a lengthy letter and some major decisions, he has decided to focus on his new business and retire. If you ever need an electrician, call Sparkbusters.
He's an electrician.
Yeah, Sparkbusters is the name?
Okay,
Tough to
is there a
find.
motion?
Yes.
Support.
the city's,
Support.
electrician now.
Any further discussion?
Nice.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Steve, have you talked to Brett?
Yes, I didn't know, I
That was
did,
good as,
I thought maybe you guys would just hang up late.
and I leave it up to you if you, this was tabled, but we'll
If-
untable it. I think we need a motion to untable it, actually.
No, you didn't make a motion to table it, so you don't need a motion to table it.
Okay, all right.
You just agreed to.
All right, so we'll just blaze through real, I don't know, there was 8 copies, so there should have been an extra one there. Yeah, we'll just blaze real through. This is just the annual report. There's some stuff you guys can take and read at your own leisure. On page 3, you'll see, page 3, you will see the emergency staff as of right now in 2019. We are running an EMT class in February, hoping to get some new people.
Is there another copy? I think, Marshall, do you need a copy?
Yes.
I made the copy. I made 8.
Can you get me one?
Yeah, well, I can give you this one when I'm done. I didn't know how many I needed, but I made 8. So if you wanna skip ahead, you can see, after page 6, is the year in review. The first page is just the December calls, so that would be your normal monthly, report for that. The page behind that is the, annual report for 2018. Whoops, it says 2017. Whoops, forgot to change that number. That is 2018 right there. You'll see on the bottom it's correct. So you see all the responses by the firefighters, the types of fires that we had, and the number of calls. So it was pretty even with last year. We had one more call over this year. And then it moves on to the ambulance. Second to the last page there is the end of the year for 2018. You can see we had 475 calls there. You can see all the responses by the staff, all the agencies, all the different hospitals, origins, time of days. Other than that, I was gonna have some more information for you, but I got called away on a call, so, I will provide that at the, next meeting for you guys. But I can certainly answer any questions. You can spend as much or little time as you want on this.
See, the graphs are colorful.
Yeah, well, I created a new spreadsheet for the, for the ambulances and the fire department, and there's a lot of data to track, and it just makes it easier for everybody to
Yeah.
see. These reports are now, these monthly reports are going to be sent to every township every month as well, to the clerks, so that I thought those were going, but it turns out they weren't. So, since they are part of our service and they, contribute to the rig subsidy, I have asked that those reports be sent every month to all the clerks, so that all the boards get a good idea of what's going on throughout the year.
Good.
And we did have our quarterly meeting with the ambulance commission, so the townships will be, at their annual meetings in March, will be discussing the rig subsidy, so. I don't have any budget numbers for you or anything this evening. We can either have some for next month or just wait until the auditors are done and go over that stuff in March or April, I guess, whenever they come back and give their report. But by the end of January,
Do you
we
have,
should.
financials for next month? I think that would be fine.
Yep, yeah, cause the last bits of December will then be in the report, so the preliminaries on those financials aren't even quite finished, but absolutely can bring those for everybody next month. So decently busy year again.
Okay,
It would be nice to say that you weren't busy, right?
Yeah,
we didn't, in the city, and I had that in my fire report, we didn't lose, any structures, or any loss of life this year. So, I mean, that was a good thing. We did have some, structure fires that we assisted with other agencies. There were some buildings that were lost in places, but I mean, they were kind of fully engulfed by the time anybody even got called, so it was nothing anybody could do, but,
Very good.
Is this a combined,
it's, the annual has both fire and ambulance in it,
Okay.
yep.
okay. Okay, that's great. I know you've been making visits to other townships around, how are those going?
Good. They asked, some of the townships asked me to come out, and help explain some of the data that was provided at the commission meeting. Some of them, need assistance, some of them don't. Eagles Nest called me today and said with the stuff that was provided, they think they have enough to make their presentation, and then they've still got time if they still have more questions, that they need answered. I can go out to their next meeting and answer those. So I went out to Greenwood and answered questions last week. Going to Kugler on Wednesday, or no, Brighting on Wednesday, and then Kugler. So just to answer any preliminary questions, they have to take that to their people at their annual meetings. It's any levy stuff like that is they vote as a township, not just as the board. So
I forget what that number is. That based that 15 or 30? Is that per?
Per
person?
resident, per person, yes.
Okay, so if you got 4 people living in a home, it'd be 4. Okay.
Yeah, so if
I can't remember.
if there's 100 people in your
Yeah.
township, then you would pay
Okay.
whatever that amount
was.
is
Okay.
set,
Okay.
yep.
Yeah, okay. Just wasn't remembering.
So there was breakdowns of all the 10-year costs of which is something that is now, I've asked the townships to request that in the actual contract, that every time there's a contract, and it can be looked at every year as well, but at least every 3 years when that contract needs to be reviewed, there should be a 10-year projection showing how that fund is doing. That's sort of something that was not done in the last 30-some years, and that's kind of how it ended up where nobody really knew, that it was falling so far behind.
Oh, sure.
And now it's sort of playing catch up, but it's a kind of a 10-year plan, because there's just, nobody's gonna be able to just fix it, in a year.
I can remember back when we went to ask for $1 more per person, but that's a long time ago, so
Yeah.
I understand where you're.
Yeah, it started at $7.24 in 1988, and nobody ever raised it till 2003, and that was when it went to $10 a head. And then it was discovered how far actually behind it was falling, and this last contract, it got raised to $15 per person. Basically, it should have been incrementally kept an eye on and
Yeah.
raised over time, and it was just one of those things that it takes a lot of work and a lot of research and a lot of going out and
Yeah.
talking to everybody. Nobody's had that kind of time, because the service itself, making sure that the patients have what they need, has always been the top priority, and that's always been done really, really well. But some of this kind of stuff is kind of fallen by the wayside, and so we're working very hard to catch that up now.
You said last time the request was to move it to 15, and it's gone up now, the request now has gone up, or the 15 is what the request is?
It currently is that.
Okay,
The request is to double it, to make it 30, so that in 10 years, it will no longer be behind. And that projection, the reason that that's important is because depending on how much life we can actually get out of these new rigs, we had to pick a number, so we based it on 7 years, but you might get 7.5 or 8 before you have to change that chassis. So that would change those numbers and stretch that money further. But we weren't gonna promise, we can get 10 years out of a chassis, we're gonna make, you have to have some reasonable kind of expectation, so.
sorry if this is a little naive, but are you talking about just ambulances now, or are you talking about rigs, ambulances, and fire?
Just ambulance rigs,
Okay.
yeah. The fire rigs, are at least 20-year rigs.
Uh-huh.
They do not go out as much, as you can see by the data. They still age, even just not being used, but they age slower.
Well, the ones that I've seen are still nice and shiny.
Yeah, I mean, we try and wash everything and keep very good care of it, yeah. They're expensive.
Going back to the $30 thing, is that only collected from the members within who belong, the townships that belong to the?
The city and the townships, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And where I was going with that, obviously the unorganized township would have they wouldn't pay into that at all.
Yeah, there is a part of a township that we cover that has never been part of that.
Okay.
But until we figure out what we're doing, I can't really go to them and say, there's a township that's actually split between 4 services.
Okay.
And they have never contributed to any of those services
Okay.
because of that 4-way split.
Sure.
Which township is that?
That is, embarrassed.
I figured that one.
Yeah.
So now, the request that you made, the presentation you made, that goes to their annual meeting or their city administration?
Each township, well, the board discusses it and then we'll present it to their township at their annual meetings. And,
What happens if they deny it? What sort of authority do we have or do you have?
I don't have any, ultimately, the city has the authority to either accept that or reject that and could remove anybody out of their PSA. They are not legally obligated to keep anyone in their ambulance service. Ultimately, that's the city's decision though. But if somebody decided they didn't wanna contribute anymore, the city would have to make that decision as to how to handle that.
Did they ever come back with counter proposal saying we can't afford 30, but we can afford 25 or?
No, nobody said anything yet,
No,
I mean,
It's all or nothing.
that's what was presented to them, is to how to fix the plan. And then it's up to each one of them to discuss it with their members.
Okay. And you expect the answers back from them,
After their March meetings and
okay.
elections and all that, yep. This would not take effect until 2020, the current contract goes through 2019.
Okay, good report, Steve, thank you very much. Is there a motion to support? I mean, a motion to, accept?
7.2 and 7.3. Yeah, so moved.
Support?
Supported.
Okay, any further discussion? Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion is carried. Presentation of claims.
Here you go.
All in favor?
This is where my hands is,
Start
so.
signing.
Yeah, welcome all of you.
This would be a motion to pay the bills.
Okay,
One second, the 4 of you would sign this blue folders basket, and Orland, you'll sign all of the baskets.
Supposed
But
to.
don't,
Okay.
Don't,
Am I gonna get-
Oh, you get twice as much work as they should.
Okay, so, there is a motion to,
So moved.
yeah,
I'll
support.
second.
Any discussion? All in favor of, paying the bills, say aye.
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 Opposed? I said aye.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Huh?
This is after question. And I remember back in the day, some people would come up ahead of time and sign them.
Yeah, normally, Terry had the baskets, but I forgot.
I'm
to
just
put it-
curious, that's.
Yeah,
something
Yeah,
still
Monday
do.
before.
Yeah, you can come up as early as you
Yeah,
want.
okay, I
so-
just don't know if we had something different for that.
No, we just forgot to put them out with all the chaos at the beginning here.
You know, like,
Okay. Okay, well, before adjournment, Lindy, nice job, you did a nice job of reporting, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Having all that information, that's really helpful, and thanks for bearing with me when I forgot to, lost my place or forgot to ask for a motion. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
second.
Okay, any discussion? I didn't think so, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much for a very pleasant, first meeting of 2019 and with my